The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the grand house, glinting off the polished floors and the countless pieces of art that adorned the walls. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and the rich scent of polished wood. In this house lived a man known by many, a musician whose name brought applause and admiration wherever he went. Yet, despite his fame, there was a quiet curiosity that lingered within him, a desire to see the unseen, to hear the unheard. The house hummed with the gentle rhythm of daily chores. The maid moved gracefully from room to room, carrying baskets of clean clothes and trays of freshly polished silver. She had been working here for many years, and though her tasks were often unnoticed, she approached each with care. There was a softness in her movements, a silent attention to detail, and occasionally, a faint hum that floated through the rooms. It was not a practice song, nor a professional melody, but a tune that seemed to rise naturally from her spirit. The musician, curious as always, had noticed her hums. He had been at the piano in the main hall, practicing a difficult piece that had kept him awake many nights. The music was complex, demanding both skill and emotion, and he often played it with a furrowed brow, his fingers dancing across the keys in a precise, almost mechanical way. One day, as he paused to sip his tea, he overheard the maid humming near the window. The tune caught his attention because it was simple, yet it carried a warmth that even his elaborate compositions sometimes lacked. He watched her for a moment, leaning against the doorway, hidden enough not to be seen but close enough to hear every note of her quiet melody. There was something in her hum that stirred a feeling in him he had not experienced for years. It was as if the music came from a place beyond skill, beyond training. It was honest, raw, and alive. He found himself wondering, almost playfully, what it would sound like if she were to play something much more difficult, something that even he found challenging. The next day, he decided to speak to her. He waited until she was arranging flowers in the hall, her hands moving with care, her eyes focused on the delicate blooms. He cleared his throat softly, and she looked up, startled at first, then quickly composed herself with a polite smile. "I have a request," he said, his voice calm but carrying a spark of curiosity. "I want you to try something. It is a piece I have been working on. It is not easy. In fact, it is very difficult." The maid blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. She had never been asked to play anything of significance, let alone a piece meant for someone as skilled as the musician before her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt a mixture of excitement and fear. I will try," she said softly, bowing her head, her hands clenching slightly in anticipation. He smiled, a small, approving smile. "Good. I am curious to see what you can do. Don't worry if it is not perfect. Just play, and let the music speak." She nodded, her mind spinning with thoughts. How could she play something so complicated? She had grown up around music, yes, but never had the chance to learn in a formal way. Her fingers were nimble, and her ear was good, but she had no experience with pieces that demanded both precision and emotion. Still, there was a spark of determination in her heart. She would try no matter what. Over the next few days, she found small moments to practice. The house was quiet in the early mornings and late evenings, giving her the perfect chance to sit at the piano without being disturbed. At first, her fingers stumbled over the keys, hitting wrong notes and awkward chords. She would pause, sigh, and start again. Frustration crept in, but she refused to give up. Each mistake was a lesson, each hesitation a chance to understand the music better. She began to feel the rhythm, not just in her fingers, but in her heart. The piece started to make sense not as a technical challenge, but as a story she could tell with sound. Meanwhile, the musician went about his usual routines, often forgetting that he had asked her to play. He practiced his own compositions, received visitors, and traveled occasionally for concerts. Yet, in quiet moments, he thought of her. What would it sound like when she played? Would it be clumsy? Or would it have something unexpected? There was a faint excitement that lingered in his mind, a sense of anticipation for a performance he had not yet witnessed. The maid's confidence slowly grew. She could not play it perfectly, but she found a voice within the piece that was hers alone. Her hands moved more fluidly, her eyes following the sheet music, but her heart guided the expression. Sometimes she would pause, close her eyes, and let the melody flow naturally, feeling the highs and lows as if the piano were speaking through her. She realized that this music was more than notes on a page. It was a reflection of her own journey, of the quiet moments of her life that had gone unnoticed by the world. Days passed, and finally, the moment arrived when the musician returned home in the afternoon. He entered the hall quietly, expecting the room to be empty. Instead, he heard the delicate strains of the piano, the sound filling the space with warmth and emotion. He stopped in his tracks, unsure if he should announce himself or simply listen. The maid was deeply immersed in the music, her fingers moving with growing confidence, her body swaying slightly as she connected with the melody. The musician watched, astonished. The piece was challenging, yes, but she played it with a feeling that he had never heard in his own performances. It was not flawless, yet it was alive, vibrant, and touching. Every note seemed to carry a story, every chord an emotion. He felt a lump rise in his throat, an unfamiliar mix of admiration and surprise. How could someone without formal training evoke such feeling? How could the music speak so clearly, so powerfully? When she finally finished, she looked up, her face flushed with effort and nervousness. She expected criticism, perhaps even disappointment. Instead, she saw the musician smiling, a look of awe in his eyes. He approached her slowly, as if afraid to break the magic in the room. "That was remarkable," he said softly. "Not because it was perfect, but because it spoke. You have something rare, something real. You let the music speak from within you, not just from the notes. That is a gift." The maid's eyes widened, disbelief and pride mingling together. She had been afraid, unsure if she could meet expectations. Yet here was recognition from someone she had long admired. The room seemed to hum with the lingering echoes of her performance, a quiet testament to courage, determination, and the unexpected brilliance that can arise when someone dares to try. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. It was not about fame, training, or perfection. It was about music as a language of the heart, a connection that transcended skill and status. And though the future was uncertain, both knew that this small, unplanned performance had changed something forever. The day had started like any other, but it ended with a revelation. That true music comes not from practice alone, but from the courage to express what lies within, even in the quietest corners of a grand house. After that first unexpected performance, the maid found herself thinking constantly about music. Each day, while performing her usual duties, her mind wandered to the piano, to the complex piece that had so challenged her fingers and yet spoken so deeply to her heart. She was no longer content to simply hum quietly while dusting or arranging flowers. The music demanded attention, practice, and understanding. She began to spend her evenings at the piano more intentionally. The house was silent after the staff had retired to their quarters, and she could feel the weight of each note as she tried to play it correctly. It was frustrating at times. Some passages felt impossible, her fingers refusing to obey her will, slipping over the keys, and creating jarring sounds instead of the melody she imagined. Yet, with every error, she learned something new. She discovered patterns in the music, how certain phrases repeated in ways she had not noticed, and how the emotion behind each note mattered more than precision. It was not about playing perfectly. It was about feeling the music. Each time she returned to the piano, she felt her confidence grow just a little. The first time, it had been raw, nervous, and uncertain. Now, she approached the keys with quiet determination, treating each practice as an opportunity to discover herself. She played slowly at first, learning each section by heart, then tried to bring the tempo closer to the original, adjusting her fingers, her touch, and her understanding with every attempt. She discovered nuances in the piece that she had never noticed before. The way a note could linger just long enough to make a phrase feel sad, or how a soft touch could transform a loud section into something tender. The musician, meanwhile, continued with his public life, unaware of how much effort she was putting into the piece. He practiced and performed, often reflecting on the human heart behind every melody he composed or played. There was a curiosity in him, a quiet expectation, as if he sensed she would eventually play again, perhaps better this time. Yet he never pressured her. He had always believed that music could not be forced, that it must come from willingness and feeling. One evening, as he returned unexpectedly from a late rehearsal, he heard a melody coming from the piano room. It was soft at first, tentative, yet unmistakably more confident than the last time. He paused at the door, listening. She was playing with an awareness that had grown in the days since her first attempt. Her hands moved more gracefully, her eyes focused yet relaxed. The difficult passages that had once tripped her up were no longer obstacles. She found ways to express them in her own voice. There was still room for growth, but the improvement was remarkable. He quietly watched from the doorway, not wanting to disturb her concentration. Each note seemed to carry a story, every chord a message. He realized then that talent could not be measured only by technical skill. It was the honesty, the emotion, and the willingness to engage with the music that made it powerful. Her fingers did not move with perfect accuracy, but they moved with intention, and that intention spoke more than flawless technique ever could. The maid felt the presence of someone in the room, though she did not stop playing immediately. It was a strange mixture of surprise and fear, knowing that someone was observing her practice. But there was also a thrill. She continued to play, letting the music flow naturally, allowing herself to become immersed in the melody. When she finally finished, she turned to see him standing there watching silently. His expression was soft, almost reverent. "You've made progress," he said, his voice gentle. "Not just in your playing, but in how you let the music speak through you. It has grown beyond the first time. There is emotion, understanding, and courage in it now. That is more than most musicians achieve in years of formal training." Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride and humility. She had worried so much about making mistakes, about disappointing him. Yet here he was, acknowledging the effort, the dedication, and the feeling she had poured into her practice. She realized that she had found something more than skill. She had discovered a part of herself she had not known existed. Music was no longer just a curiosity. It was a language through which she could express the emotions that words could never capture. From that evening onward, she began to approach the piano with a sense of purpose. She experimented with phrasing, dynamics, and tempo, learning to breathe life into each note. She practiced during quiet mornings and late nights, finding inspiration in the smallest things around the house. The gentle sway of trees outside the window, the soft murmur of distant conversations, even the rhythm of her own footsteps. Every observation became a part of her interpretation of the piece. The musician began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor as well. She moved through her daily tasks with a new sense of confidence, her steps lighter, her expression more thoughtful. He saw how deeply she connected with the music, how it had become more than a challenge. It was a part of her life now. Occasionally, he would stop to ask about her progress, not to give instructions, but to listen and understand how she approached the music. Their interactions became more than master and maid. They shared a silent dialogue through the language of sound. One rainy afternoon, the maid paused at the piano, listening to the steady patter of raindrops against the windows. She realized how much she had learned in the past days, not only about the piece but about herself. She could feel her emotions more clearly, her thoughts flowing through her fingertips. She played again, letting the music rise and fall, the notes capturing moments of joy, hesitation, sorrow, and hope. She could feel the story within the music, and with each repetition, she told it more convincingly. The musician, watching from the doorway once more, noticed something remarkable. It was not just her ability to play difficult passages or to remember each note. It was her ability to convey feeling. There was a voice in the music, a human voice, raw and unpolished yet profoundly moving. He understood that this was what made her playing different from his own. It was personal, vulnerable, and alive. He felt a deep respect for her dedication and the courage it had taken to face a challenge so far beyond her comfort zone. The days turned into weeks and her skills grew steadily. She learned to approach the piece not as an obstacle, but as a story she could tell. Mistakes still happened, of course, but they were no longer a source of fear or frustration. Each error became a lesson, each hesitation an opportunity to refine her interpretation. She discovered the joy of imperfection, the beauty of authenticity, and the power of persistence. Through all this, the musician found himself inspired as well. Watching someone embrace music with such honesty reminded him why he had fallen in love with it in the first place. It was not just about accolades, fame, or flawless technique. It was about expression, connection, and the courage to reveal oneself through sound. He began to reflect on his own performances, considering how he might capture more of that raw emotion that she had so naturally brought to life. In the quiet moments of the house, their worlds intersected through music. She learned to play with heart, and he learned to listen with it. They both understood that the journey was more important than the destination, that the effort, practice, and willingness to engage with music honestly were what truly mattered. And as the maid continued to pour herself into the piano, the house seemed to hum with a new energy, a subtle promise that something remarkable was unfolding, something that could not be measured by skill alone but by the courage to let music speak. One afternoon, the musician returned home earlier than usual. The house was unusually quiet, and he noticed the faint sound of piano music drifting from the main hall. Curious, he followed the melody and stopped at the doorway, peering inside. The maid was at the piano, her fingers moving with fluidity and confidence that he had not seen before. She seemed completely absorbed in the music, her eyes closed, swaying slightly to the rhythm. He watched silently, unsure if he should announce his presence or simply enjoy the unexpected performance. The piece she played was the same difficult composition he had asked her to try, yet it sounded different now. Her interpretation was not perfect in terms of technical precision, but it was filled with emotion, depth, and authenticity. Each note carried meaning, each chord expressed feeling, and the melody seemed to tell a story all its own. As he listened, memories of his own performances and the many hours spent perfecting pieces in his youth came to mind. He realized that he had often focused so much on accuracy and technical skill that the soul of the music sometimes got lost. In contrast, this maid, with no formal training, had managed to capture the essence of the piece simply by letting herself feel it. There was a raw honesty in her playing that he found deeply moving. She continued playing, unaware of his presence. The music filled the room with a warmth that seemed to settle over everything. The polished wooden floors, the paintings on the walls, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. All of it seemed to come alive with her performance. The musician felt a lump in his throat as he realized that she was communicating emotions through the piano that words could never express. Her music spoke directly to the heart. When she finally finished, she opened her eyes and saw him standing there. For a moment, there was silence, both of them unsure what to say. The maid's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. She had poured her heart into the music, and now she wondered if it had been noticed. "That was extraordinary," the musician said softly, breaking the silence. "Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. You let the music speak, and that is something very few can do." The maid's eyes widened in surprise. She had feared criticism, yet here was praise and admiration. She realized that her efforts had been seen, not for technical skill alone, but for the emotion and honesty she had conveyed. A sense of relief and accomplishment washed over her, and she felt a new confidence blossoming within. Over the next few days, their interactions around the piano changed. The musician began to leave her more space, observing from a distance as she practiced, offering gentle encouragement when needed. He asked questions about how she approached the piece, what inspired her interpretations, and how she felt while playing. She spoke about her thoughts and emotions, describing how the music made her feel alive, calm, or reflective. Their conversations were no longer just about notes and techniques. They were about feeling, understanding, and expressing something deeper. The maid continued to practice diligently, finding joy in the process rather than focusing solely on the outcome. She experimented with dynamics, timing, and expression, learning to make the piece her own. Mistakes were no longer frustrating. They were opportunities to explore different ways of expressing the music. She began to understand that perfection was not the goal, but connection was. One evening, as she played a particularly emotional passage, the musician noticed tears glistening in her eyes. The music had moved her deeply, and he realized that this was what made her playing so powerful. It was not just about skill. It was about allowing oneself to be vulnerable, to let emotions flow freely, and to connect with something larger than oneself. He felt inspired by her courage and honesty. He also began to reflect on his own approach to music. Watching her reminded him that true artistry was not merely about technique or public recognition. It was about communicating a message, telling a story, and connecting with the listener on a human level. He realized that he had much to learn from someone who played with such authenticity and heart. As days turned into weeks, the maid's playing grew more refined and expressive. The difficult passages that once challenged her were now approached with creativity and confidence. She learned to embrace the ebb and flow of the music, understanding when to linger on a note, when to let a chord resonate, and when to allow a pause to speak volumes. Each practice session became a journey, a way to explore emotions, tell stories, and discover herself. The musician began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. She moved through her daily tasks with newfound grace and confidence. Her presence seemed lighter, more assured, as if the music had unlocked something within her that had been dormant. He admired her dedication and the transformation that had occurred, recognizing that the power of music extended far beyond the piano keys. One afternoon, he invited her to play for a small gathering of friends who were also musicians. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she could perform in front of others. But he encouraged her gently, reminding her that the beauty of her playing lay in its honesty and emotion, not in technical perfection. With a mixture of nerves and excitement, she agreed. When she played, the room fell silent. Her fingers moved confidently, each note carefully chosen, each phrase imbued with feeling. The listeners were captivated, not by flawless execution, but by the depth and sincerity of her performance. She told a story through the music, one that resonated with everyone present. The musician watched with pride and admiration, realizing that her talent had the power to move others in ways he had never imagined. After the performance, the maid received warm praise and encouragement from the listeners. She felt a mixture of relief, joy, and pride. For the first time, she understood that her music could reach beyond herself, touching the hearts of others. The experience reinforced her belief that true artistry was not about recognition or fame, but about connection, expression, and authenticity. From that day onward, her practice sessions became more focused on expression and storytelling. She continued to explore the nuances of the piece, finding new ways to convey emotion and meaning. The musician continued to support her, offering guidance and encouragement, but always respecting her individuality and creative voice. Together, they discovered that music was not just a collection of notes, but a living, breathing language capable of expressing the deepest human emotions. Through this journey, both the maid and the musician learned valuable lessons. She learned that dedication, practice, and emotional honesty could transform even the most challenging pieces into something beautiful and meaningful. He learned that true artistry required listening, observing, and appreciating the heart behind the performance, not just the technical skill. Their shared experiences around the piano created a bond of respect, admiration, and understanding that transcended roles and titles. The house, once quiet and orderly, now seemed to hum with a new energy. The music had become a part of its atmosphere, a gentle reminder of the power of expression, perseverance, and courage. And as the maid continued to pour her heart into the piano, she realized that the journey was far from over. Each day offered new challenges, new emotions, and new opportunities to let the music speak, both to herself and to those who were willing to listen. Months had passed since the maid's first hesitant attempt at the difficult piano piece. The house now resonated with her music, not just in the main hall but in the hearts of everyone who spent time there. She had grown immensely, both in skill and in confidence. The music was no longer a challenge to conquer but a part of her life, a voice she could rely on to express her emotions and thoughts when words failed. The musician watched her progress with admiration. Each day, he noticed something new in her playing. A delicate touch here, a bold phrasing there, subtle changes that made the music hers. It was no longer about impressing him or achieving technical perfection. It was about honesty, emotion, and connection. He realized that she had become a true interpreter of music, someone who could convey depth and feeling without relying solely on training or technique. One afternoon, he asked her to play for a small audience that included people outside the household. They were friends, musicians, and enthusiasts who had gathered to experience something unique. The maid felt a flutter of nerves. Public performance was different from private practice, and the thought of playing for strangers was intimidating. Yet, she remembered the encouragement and faith the musician had shown her. She took a deep breath, approached the piano, and began. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the room changed. The music flowed naturally, each note imbued with her emotions, each chord telling a story. The audience was silent, captivated not by technical mastery but by the honesty and depth of her performance. Her music spoke directly to the heart, drawing them into her world, making them feel joy, sorrow, hope, and longing. The maid lost herself in the music, letting her feelings guide every movement, every sound. As the final note lingered in the air, there was a moment of complete silence, followed by heartfelt applause. The maid looked up, surprised and overwhelmed. She had feared judgment, but what she received was appreciation and recognition for the authenticity and courage in her playing. The musician smiled proudly, understanding that her music had reached beyond mere entertainment. It had touched lives. After the performance, people approached her with words of admiration and curiosity. They asked about her background, her inspiration, and how she had developed such an expressive style. She spoke simply, honestly, sharing bits of her story, the challenges she had faced, and how music had always been a refuge and a voice for her emotions. Her sincerity resonated with everyone, making them respect her not just as a performer, but as a person who had worked diligently and courageously to share her gift. The musician encouraged her to continue performing and even suggested recording a piece so that others could experience her music beyond the confines of the house. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready for such recognition. But the thought of sharing her emotions and connecting with more people through music gave her courage. She agreed, and together, they worked on selecting a piece that best represented her style and emotional depth. As they prepared for the recording, the maid reflected on her journey. She remembered the first hesitant notes, the awkward mistakes, and the fear she had felt. Now, she felt a quiet strength, a deep understanding of herself, and a connection to music that was both personal and universal. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a channel through which she could express herself, communicate with others, and touch hearts. The day of the recording arrived. The maid sat at the piano, her fingers poised over the keys, heart steady yet excited. She closed her eyes and let the music flow naturally, allowing each note, each phrase, to reflect her emotions and experiences. The recording captured the essence of her playing, the honesty, vulnerability, and courage that had defined her journey. When the final chord faded, she opened her eyes to see the musician nodding in approval, a smile of pride and admiration on his face. After the recording, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had faced her fears, embraced her talent, and shared her music with the world. The recognition was not just about fame or applause. It was about connecting with others, expressing herself fully, and inspiring those who heard her. She realized that true artistry was not defined by skill alone, but by authenticity, courage, and the willingness to let one's heart speak. The musician, too, learned from the journey. Watching her grow, perform, and connect with others reminded him of the true purpose of music: to communicate, inspire, and touch lives. He understood that technical mastery, while important, was only part of the story. The human element, the emotions, the vulnerability, the courage, was what made music truly meaningful. In the months that followed, the maid continued to practice, perform, and explore new pieces. She gained confidence not only in her abilities but in her own voice, her identity, and her place in the world. She learned to approach challenges with patience and determination, to embrace mistakes as lessons, and to trust her instincts and emotions in her music. The house, once quiet and orderly, now resonated with the energy of creativity, courage, and expression. The piano had become a symbol of growth, perseverance, and the transformative power of music. Visitors often remarked on the warmth and vitality that seemed to fill the rooms whenever she played, and the musician took pride in witnessing her journey from hesitant beginner to confident, expressive performer. Ultimately, the maid's story was not just about music. It was about discovery, courage, and the human spirit. Through dedication, practice, and emotional honesty, she had found her voice, her identity, and her ability to touch others. Her journey inspired those around her, reminding everyone that true talent often lies hidden, waiting for the opportunity, courage, and commitment to be revealed. And so, the maid's music continued to speak, not just through the piano, but through her life, her actions, and the connections she made with others. It was a testament to the power of passion, persistence, and the simple, profound truth that the heart, when allowed to express itself, could move mountains, change perspectives, and touch the deepest parts of the human soul. The journey had begun with a simple request, but it had transformed into something far greater. A story of courage, expression, and the enduring magic of music.